Hi, this is Cheryl Schneider. I'm presenting tonight on a trip to Prague that I took in September. And just to give you a little bit of background, um, Prague has been on our bucket list for a long time, and it just doesn't seem to easily flow with any of the other trips that we had planned. So we just ended up doing this one just all by itself, a week in Prague. And unfortunately, I was having a lot of hip pain at the time that I went, to the point where I was using a cane. So I was very anxious about walking on all the cobblestones in Prague with a sore hip and a cane. Then the week before we left, I found out that there was rain forecast every single day. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, well, maybe it's just going to rain part of the day. Maybe it's just going to rain part of the day. Maybe it, doesn't really say how much it's going to rain, a little drizzle versus pouring rain. But, between my hip and the weather forecast, I was a little bit bummed out. And so the fact that I loved Prague as much as I did is in the wake of, my hip and the weather, um, kind of says something about it. I'm just curious. I know Susan has been to Prague. Who else has been there? Oops. Linda, I can see you talking, but I can't hear anything. Are we on?
Yeah, no, I just while you were talking, I muted myself.
Oh,
Briefly, no, I haven't spent much time there, so
okay.
I'm looking forward to this.
Okay. Anybody else? No. Okay. All right. So this is a map of the Czech Republic. We spent most of our time in Prague, which is, in the center here. We did take an overnight trip down to Český Krumlov, which is down here near Austria. And as I talk, you'll see that it's important that this river right here, the Vltava River, runs through Prague all the way through the north to south pole of the Czech Republic and then through Český Krumlov. And you'll see why that's important a little bit later. So Prague is a city bigger than Boston. It's about the size of Dallas. The population is 1.3 million. And it's a very historic city. And there's lots of areas that, tourists don't go to. It's kind of like Boston. Um, but this is the touristy area. The old city, which is called, oh, can't see. Can you guys see the whole slide with the writing on the right-hand side?
I can see it.
Okay. Oops. Okay, good. The old town is called Stare Mesto. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And then this part over here on the same side of the river, Josefov, is the Jewish quarter. It has a long Jewish history. Then there's this river, the Vltava River, that runs through the middle of Prague. And then the Charles Bridge, which is the most famous of the 18 bridges that go from one side to the other, crosses into what's called Mala Strana, which means lesser town. So it's a newer area than the old town. And then this area up here, Rodkany, I'm not good with these Czech words, so I'm probably butchering them. But anyway, Rodkany is the castle area. So the right-hand side on this picture is a fairly flat area, whereas the other side of the river is much hillier. I couldn't decide where I wanted to stay. There's pros and cons to both of them. So what I ended up doing was the best of both worlds. We stayed for 3 days in Old Town. Then we went to Český Krumlov for one night. And then when we came back, we stayed up here near the castle. Okay. So the Vltava River is really important in Czech life. It's the key to transportation, energy, and it's a water source. So the history of Prague plays out in a lot of the architecture and a lot of the things that you go to see. Until World War I ended, it was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. After World War I ended, Czechoslovakia was formed with Prague as its capital, and it was occupied by Nazi Germany in World War II. Prague is known as the city so beautiful that it was spared by Hitler, or so the story goes. That seems to be a little bit controversial. Some people think that it was not damaged as much as some other cities because it wasn't as a military strategic location. Anyways, so overall, the structures in Prague fared really well during World War II as compared to other cities. After World War II, Czechoslovakia became part of the communist bloc. And so there were a lot of Soviet influences. In 1989, Czechoslovakia freed itself, became a democratic country. And in 1993, it split into the Czech Republic and Slovakia, which is how it is now. So Prague is the capital. And in 2002, there were a lot of buildings and the subway was damaged due to extensive floods in Prague. And again, this will come back later in the presentation. Okay, so this was the first hotel we stayed in, which was right around the corner from the old town square and the famous astronomical clock. So this hotel used to be a warehouse, and the guy's name was Rott. And so that's what you see here. The hotel actually extends around the corner. And this really interesting sculpture, this is from the other direction. The picture on the right is from the other direction, but you can see the sculpture in both places. And on nice days, apparently, which we didn't have many of, a lot of people sit around on these little benches. They're not really benches, they're only for one person, but it's quite the gathering place, apparently. So
Looks like
back
you
to
had
the
good
weather.
weather.
Sorry?
Looks like good weather at that point, or did you
Well, I was just about to say, the day we arrived, it had poured buckets in the morning, and this is the afternoon of the day we arrived. The following couple of days were okay. They really were okay. It would rain a little bit and then it would stop. It was overcast, maybe a little bit of drizzle. I mean, it was totally tolerable for walking around. So the first half was okay. Okay, so the Hotel Rot had a roof deck. And we really enjoyed going up there with beer. Prague is a beer city. So we would go up there with beer and just like look 360-degree views around of all these orange terracotta roofs. And Prague is known as the city of 100 spires. And you can see, especially in the right picture, only 3 of them, but they're all over the place. On the left shows the castle complex and the Cathedral of St. Vitus. Now, that's the other side of the river. You can't see the river from here, but it's a fairly compact area, easily walkable. So the low yellow building here, this is the castle itself, and this is the cathedral in the middle of the castle. And this is the same roof deck, just some different views at night, which we really enjoyed that roof deck. There are some restaurants that have roof decks, but this was just one that we could go to because we were staying in the hotel. So that was really nice. Okay, so the Old Town Square was literally around the corner from our hotel. And I was a little bit worried that it would be noisy, but it was not at all. So the Old Town Square, this is where they have the Christmas markets. And this here, you can see my cursor, right?
Yes.
Okay, so this is a cathedral. This is the Old Town Hall. The famous astronomical clock is on this side. And in the middle is this obelisk. And over here is a statue. They all have stories that go along with them. But it's an area that is ringed by little cafes and street entertainers. And there's little alleys off all of these areas. So it's a very busy, bustling, busy place. Okay, so this is the famous astronomical clock in Prague. Carol, you showed a picture of an astronomical clock from your presentation, right? I forget what city it was in.
Yeah, it was in Strasbourg at the cathedral.
Okay.
I mean, I didn't really get into like all the details of it. That one was a little more religious, where you could see like religious figures would come out of the clock and
Yeah,
stuff
this
like
one does
that.
too.
Oh, okay.
So this was a really fun afternoon. Directly across from this clock, there's 2 or 3 little cafes where you can sit and have coffee. Of course, the coffee's pretty expensive because it's right across from the astronomical clock, but we sat there and read through this guide we had about what all the different pieces are. And it was fascinating. But on the hour, this area gets so crowded, you literally can't move. I thought it was a little anticlimactic, but here's what happens. So this clock is really old. It's from 1410. And the top dial that has blue, black, and orange, the top dial tells the time. It tells old Czech time, Babylonian time, and the current time. So it depends on which circular wheel of numbers you're looking at. The blue section is daylight. The black section is nighttime. And the orange section is dusk and dawn. So when things are changing. And so, you know, it's not like a regular clock we look at where half of it is day and half of it would be night. Excuse me. It's all turning in different ways independently of each other. So I don't know if you can see right here is one of the hands of the clock. And that hand it's an actual hand, and it has two fingers that are pointing. Those fingers show you the current time. Then right here, I don't know if you can see that, there's a little round thing. That is the moon. So it's a black and silver ball that's on the dial that tells you what moon phase it's in. Now on either side up here, here are Catholic saints. Up here, we're in these little windows. Every hour on the hour, these windows open, and there's what they call the walk of the apostles. And you can just barely see them through the window, and they circle all the way around. Now, these figures here represent the four things that were despised at the time of the clock's making. So one of them represents vanity. You can't, I wish I could have gotten better pictures, but I didn't, when I took the pictures, I wasn't paying as much attention to the faces of these figures. So the vanity is looking at itself in a mirror. Then there's one that represents greed, and it's somebody holding a bag of gold. And then there's one that represents lust. And then there's one that represents death. You can probably see that this one is a skeleton. This is the one that strikes the time. When it strikes the time, all the other figures shake their head side to side like they're saying no, indicating that we're not going to get rid of them very easily. So we're not going to get rid of greed, vanity, lust, and death easily. So when the clock strikes, these windows up top open, these apostles turn around, and at the very end of it all, up here is a rooster. And at the very end, the rooster crows very loudly. And that's it. The whole thing takes maybe 30 seconds. So the bottom part of it down here really doesn't have anything to do with time, and there's no moving parts to it. The bottom shows the zodiacs, and it shows the saints' days. So anyway, like I said, we had a lot of fun just sitting there, reading our guide, trying to figure all this stuff out. And no, it is not set for daylight savings time. So you have to just adjust. Okay, so the architecture in Prague, because it's so old, it's this mix of different styles. And what's interesting is that the old and the new are like right next to each other. And all over the place, if you look for it, there are things that indicate what went on during various points in its history. Excuse me, and I'll point some of those out as we go through. So this is just some of the architecture in the old square. And, you know, you could just stand there and look at all this. It's so detailed and it's so different from each other. So this red building is actually right next to this building right here. And then there's this blue one with all of those figures on it. And if you notice up on top of the red building, there's all these flags. I don't know if this is true. I was told that it's the various sections within the Czech Republic. And then around the corner, you see these. Franz Kafka, have you guys heard of him? He was
Yeah.
a very famous author that wrote some really bizarre stuff. He was born in Prague. He's like their mascot. He's everywhere. So this statue on the left is from one of his stories. And this on the right is his head. And periodically, pieces of the head turn. And then they all catch up with each other. It's a very modern, you know, interesting sculpture. But, you know, and then you have this right near it. So this one was hand painted. I wish I could remember. We took a tour that explained all the architecture. And it's so complex and confusing that I really can't even, I thought I got a lot out of it, but none of it stuck. Excuse me. But you can see the colors and the carving and the intricacies, and some are symmetrical and some are not symmetrical, and all of these things kind of indicate what period of time it was from. And then you have things like this. These are actually, they're really interesting. It's a Spitfire, which is an old airplane that was made into these butterflies. They actually move, the wings move, and they light up at night. And then you have this around the corner from it. Really ornate, complex design. And then you have this. This is called the library, the book tunnel. It's in the lobby of a library. And what's interesting about it is when you go up to it and you put your head inside of it, it's an optical illusion that makes it look much bigger than what it really is. Bigger and longer. And it's free to go to. People line up outside and they have somebody making sure that people are not crowding it too much. Okay, so we're back in the Old Town Square, and this is the Church of St. Nicholas that was in one of those earlier pictures. This church was a Catholic church, then it was a Protestant church, and it's back to being a Catholic church again. And you can see that this happened to be during a time when there was actually blue sky. The interior of all the churches we went into are just fabulous. They're a lot like pictures of cathedrals like in Italy and stuff that I've seen. but the hallmark of this one was this chandelier that was all crystal, absolutely humongous and so beautiful. The other church that is in the Old Town Square is this one. It's called our church, the Church of Our Lady Before Tyne. Tyne is a square that is behind the church on the other side of it. And so the church is before the square, before Tyne. Just, you can see the difference in the architecture between these two churches that are in the same area. And then walking along, you'll come across something like this. This is just a sculpture of a little girl reading a book, like out of the clear blue sky. It's like, where did this come from? One thing we went to that we really enjoyed is called Blacklight Theater. And it was started in Prague, but you can find it in different European countries now. It's kind of a unique combination of dance, acrobatics, mime, and music, and it's got special effects. It is not, there's no language, there's no speaking involved at all. But they use these blacklight reactive costumes, and the costumes are also made to sort of be a striking portrayal of whatever it is that you're looking at. So it's very creative. And this was an African themed thing. So, these are various like gazelles or whatever, and then zebra. But there's music, they're moving, they're doing all kinds of dance moves and acrobatics, and I thought it was great. But you either love it or you hate it. I read really mixed reviews about it, and I wasn't sure whether we should go or not, but I was like, well, we're here, might as well. And we really enjoyed it. Okay, so now we're at the Charles Bridge. So the Charles Bridge was the first bridge built over the Vltava River to connect Old Town to Lesser Town. And it was built between 1357 and 1402. As I said, there's 18 bridges in Prague. This one is a pedestrian-only bridge. Most of them have traffic going over them. This bridge has 30 statues or sculptures, 15 on either side of the bridge. And then there's a gate on either end of the bridge that lets you into either the Old Town or the Lesser Town. It's quite the tourist spot. In fact, we went, I think this was like 8:30 in the morning, and you can see how crowded it already is. Supposedly later in the afternoon and in the summer, it's just a mob scene and you can't even move. But looking at each of the statues, you could spend hours. There are like guidebooks about each statue and what it means, and its significance, and who created it and what year it was put there. All of these statues that are there now are replicas. The originals are in a museum. Most of the statues are saints, and most of them were built between 1650 and 1750. So, being a touristy kind of thing, there are street performers, and lots of little stands selling souvenir items. It's also the location of protests and parades. So this is just a picture of the river with one of the statues next to it. There are a lot of river cruises there. We didn't take any because we didn't realize how bad the weather was going to get. And we thought we would do it the second half of our time in Prague. But there are dinner cruises, there are just, you know, sightseeing cruises. It's quite a robust business there. But like I said, that's the river. On the left is something called love locks. And you may have seen these in other European cities. The thing is, couples write their names on the lock, they attach it to the bridge, they throw the key into the river, and it's supposed to be something that gives them good luck and long relationships and that kind of stuff. This has been a real problem in a lot of cities because there can be so many locks that the weight of the locks causes structural damage. And throwing keys into the river damages the marine life. So every Tuesday in Prague, somebody comes and cuts all these locks off. They've removed 13.2 tons of locks over the past 11 years. So we were there on a Wednesday. So it had been cleared off on Tuesday. That's what's there on Wednesday. There is another area in Prague that also has lots of locks, love locks, that we didn't go to. And then the picture on the right, the statue on the right has an area like so many places do, where if you rub it, it's supposed to give good luck. And so the rubbed area, you know, turns gold. So you would see everybody rubbing this statue. So here's just some other, you know, interesting statues along the way. There was a there was a parade. This was an environmental group, and I don't know exactly what it was about, but they had musical instruments and drums, and they had flags around themselves, and they had a police escort, and you know, they kind of marched on to the center of the bridge. Somebody spoke, and then they left. On the right-hand side is somebody playing this instrument. I have no idea what it was called, but it was this big, long thing that had a very, like a tenor to it. It was very low and rumbling. Wasn't playing any music that I could recognize, but it was really interesting to listen and watch the guy playing.
It looks like a little bit like a didgeridoo.
Yes, I think that's what it is.
And what is that?
That's an instrument that the original peoples in Australia created.
Oh,
My son was in a band where one of them played it.
no kidding. That is interesting. Okay, well, there was a guy there. He got a lot of attention. Oops. Okay, so now moving on to the Jewish quarter. So some of you may know that my husband is Jewish, and he has a real interest in Jewish culture and history. So we took a semi-private tour. There were only 4 people on this, of the Jewish Quarter, which is, it borders the old town, easily walkable. So back before World War II, Prague had a very robust Jewish community. And in the 13th century was when anti-Semitism started. And the Jewish people were ordered to settle in this particular part of town. I don't know if you remember from the map, but it's right on the banks of the river, and it would flood frequently. And so it was not really a desirable part of town to live in, and it smelled because of the river. But that's where the Jews were allowed to live. In 1939, before World War II, there were 56,000 Jews. But during World War II, there were 46,000 of them were deported. Some escaped, some went into hiding, but 46,000 of the 56,000 were deported. Only 5,000 of those survived. So it's the numbers are pretty sobering, and the Jewish Quarter is full of memorials and homage to what happened during World War II. The buildings in the Jewish Quarter survived the Nazi occupation. Hitler did say he intended to preserve the Jewish Quarter in Prague as a museum of an extinct race. So the Jewish Quarter had 5 synagogues, a town hall, a ceremonial hall, which is like a funeral home, and a cemetery. So after World War II and now, the current Jewish population is far less than what it was before World War II, somewhere between 1,600 and 5,000. And this relies on census information. And there's a general feeling that people are afraid to report that they're Jewish. And that's why there's such a disparity between the 1,600 and 5,000. But there's far fewer Jews in Prague than there were then. So Mark and I walked around the Jewish Quarter by ourselves before we went on this tour. I never noticed these things. And I spelled the word wrong. It's Stolperstein, Stolpersteine, and they're also known as stumbling stones. These are all over Europe. And these mark the place where Jews lived and where they were deported from. So you'll be walking along, and if you really look down, you will see these gold blocks in with all the cobblestones. And it will have the name, the date of birth, the date of death, where they were deported to, and in what year. And we actually found this one that was in English. And the guide said that this person's family was the one that requested the Stolperstein. So there's 300 of these in Prague, but there's 60,000 of them throughout Europe. So you may have seen them in other places.
I saw them in Berlin.
Did you?
Yeah.
Yeah. So they're, you know, look down and pay your respects kind of thing. Okay. So this is one of the synagogues that's still there in the Jewish quarter. And it is the only one of the synagogues that actually functions as a synagogue now. So on Saturday mornings, you can't go in here because they're having services. But at other times, you're allowed to go in. This is called the Old New Synagogue. It was built in 1270. And when it was built, it was originally called the New Synagogue, to distinguish it from an older synagogue that was in a different location. Then in the 16th century, they started building newer synagogues. So it was no longer the New Synagogue. So that's why they called it the Old New Synagogue. But that's what it goes by at this point. So this is considered the center of life in the Jewish community. And I happened to, snap a picture that had some religious Jews standing in front of it. But this is what the sanctuary looks like. And it's the chandeliers are just beautiful. The center area with the wrought iron is called the bima. It's like an altar. And that's where the rabbis conduct the service from. And so people can be sitting 360 degrees around it. The red velvet at the end of that is where the Torah is kept. So that's called the Ark. And all synagogues have a bima and an Ark. So that's what this one is. I don't know if you can see along the edges here. There are pictures, and these are what the pictures are. All the hostages that were taken on October 7th have their pictures along the walls of this synagogue. And on them, you'll see that this one has a black sticker. This person died. This one has a blue sticker, and this person was released. But it goes all the way around with every single person who was taken hostage is represented there. So this was a year later. So it's still very much on the minds of the people who live in Prague. Has anybody ever heard of the legend of the Golem of Prague? There's a legend of the Golem in another place. But the legend of the Golem in Prague is the most famous thing, most famous one. And a golem is a figure that is made from clay from the river that is created to protect the Jewish community. And at the time, in the late 1500s, the Golem of Prague was created by a rabbi who was the rabbi of the Old New Synagogue, which at that point was just the New Synagogue. And he was trying to protect the Jewish community from pogroms. So anti-Semitic attacks on the Jewish community. As the legend goes, the golem became fearsome and violent and out of control. And so the rabbi destroyed it and put the body in the attic of the Old New Synagogue. So up here is where this golem theoretically resides. It can be reactivated according to the legend, and is brought to life with the word truth. So if you see these letters on the front of the golem, Without the first letter, the word means death. With the first letter, it means truth. So without the first letter, the golem becomes like a lifeless clod of mud. But supposedly it resides in this attic, and people are afraid, educated people are afraid to go up into the attic. So this is like a legend. Who knows? It doesn't make sense that it's true. But there's golem figurines all over the place that you can buy. My daughter collects magnets, so we got her a golem magnet. This is another one of the synagogues. It's not quite as old as the old new synagogue. This synagogue, the Pincus Synagogue, is no longer in service as a synagogue. It has been converted to a commemorative location for all the Jews in the Czech Republic, which was then Czechoslovakia, and Moravia, who were killed during the Holocaust. And it's hard to describe how moving it is. So the interior of the building is just beautiful with these carved wooden arches over the top and the wrought iron. This is their bima. But you probably can't see very well, but you can notice that there's something on the walls. And every wall in the place is covered with the names, the birth date, and the death date of every person who was involved in the Holocaust from Czechoslovakia and Moravia. So everywhere you turn, there's writing inscribed on the walls. And they did it according to families. So there'll be a family name and then all the people in the family. And, they used Roman numerals and stuff. So it's a little bit hard to decipher, but all of it is hand done. This is another synagogue. It's the newest one in the Jewish quarter, which was built in 1868. And it's called the Spanish Synagogue because it has the Moorish kind of exterior and interior. And it is a museum at this point. It's not used as a synagogue. The cemetery, I thought, was fascinating. So the cemetery, they had a limited amount of space, and the city wouldn't give them any more space. So they had to layer the bodies. And the layering is 5 to 10 levels deep. And you can see from this picture on the left, these are like some souvenir places, but the cemetery exists way down all the way to street level. And they never got rid of the tombstones. So even if it's 10 layers down, all the tombstones are just crammed in together. So the last burial there was in 1787, but the first burial was in 1439. So you can see they're all like falling over and they're mossy and they're listing to one side and crammed together. Now, our guide was really awesome and helped us to understand everything that was written on these tombstones. There's a lot of stuff written on the tombstones. And typically, you could tell from the tombstone what the person's profession was, whether they belonged to the Cohen or the Levi families, which are like priestly families in Judaism, and other large family names. So in addition to having the name of the person and the birth and the death date, there would be prayers and all kinds of symbols on the tombstones. So this one on the left that has the two hands next to each other with there's a separation between the middle finger and the ring finger. And some of you might recognize that as like the Star Trek thing. Leonard Nimoy in Star Trek was Jewish, and this is the symbol for the Cohens. On the right-hand side, this is the symbol for the Levi's. So those two families are kind of, they're like priestly, and they hold a special place in Judaism. These are some other tombstones that I could get decent pictures of. This is a wolf, and it represents a family that in English is now called Benjamin, which happens to be my husband's mother's family. This fish indicates that this person was a fisherman. I don't know if you can see that this is a pair of scissors. This person was a tailor. But you can see the Hebrew writing and how that they framed the prayers and stuff. They were so ornate. It was really, really interesting. So I just want to show you some more unique art and architecture before we saw before we went to Český Krumlov. But this is a building that wraps around the street and has mosaics on the side of it. And then this is in a shopping mall. This upside down horse with somebody riding the horse kind of upside down, and it's suspended from this beautiful dome of stained glass. So really very unique stuff. And, you know, in one place you have these faceless, huge, I mean, these babies, I was as tall as, you know, from the hand to the head. These crawling babies with no faces, I don't know what they're supposed to mean, right around the corner from a church with this level of ornate decorations inside. So there's a lot of contrast. This is another, this is the only building in Prague that looks like this. And it, I forget the name of the architecture, but they called it like the building cake or something like that. And then down the street from that is this is just the doorway to somebody's house. And this is how they've chosen to decorate it. So here's some horse guys holding up the windows. And then there's this very ornate, I forget what, Rococo or something, piece of architecture on the side of a building. Okay, so like I said, the first 3 days we were there were okay. They were not great weather, but it was tolerable and it was, you know, I could still enjoy myself and get around. Then it started raining. And I can't believe that today's weather in Boston is the way it is because imagine the heaviest rain we had today all day. It was so bad. It was the worst rain and flood since that time in 2002 when Prague flooded. Now, Prague has since then put in things to stop damage from the floods. There's locks and there's, you know, all kinds of things. But the Vltava River that runs from north to south, the entire length of the Czech Republic, the smaller towns didn't have that. And so there were 4 days of pelting rain and really serious wind. So these kind of things were popping up on my, you know, phone. And then they had this article at the hotel about the extreme rainfall and the flooding. Now, Prague was extremely wet, very slippery. The subway was closed, but it didn't get damaged. The river did not overflow the banks, although it got very close. But like I said, other parts of the Czech Republic did not fare so well. So 200 rivers overflowed. 2 million people were directly affected by the flooding. 24 people died. There were power outages and property damage. I came home from this and then the stuff happened in North Carolina. And I was watching that thinking, oh my God, you know, this has happened in the Czech Republic. Now it's happening here. What the heck is going on? So it was the kind of rain and wind. The wind was absolutely horrible. You'd see inside out umbrellas, like just dumped all over the place. And we'd go out for a little while. And even though I was wearing a poncho that went down to my knees, my shoes would be soaked. My pants would be absolutely drenched. I'd come back to the hotel and use the hair dryer to dry my shoes, and then we'd go back out again. I mean, we were there. We weren't going to like just sit in the hotel. But as you can imagine, you know, those jump on and off buses that they have in every city, those were completely full. And there were no lines to get in anywhere because there were a lot of people that weren't going out. So anyway, this started the day we went to Český Krumlov. We took a bus and it was raining a lot more in Prague that day than it was in Český Krumlov. Český Krumlov is this little town down by the Austrian border. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The Vltava River runs through it. And it's just this charming little town that has all these winding streets and interesting little places to pop in and out of, little cafes along the river. Supposedly has great restaurants, and like many, many other places, it has a castle. And the castle is over here. in the upper right corner. And multiple churches. This is one of the churches on the left. But this is a view from the little pension that we stayed at. So again, it's just this very picturesque little place. This is the castle tower, and this is a church tower. And you can see how the river runs through the town. And all of these buildings on the side of the river here are restaurants, bars, cafes, most of which were closed while we were there because of the weather and because of the weather forecast. You can see on the left here, there's some sandbags. They were sandbagging everything. And so they were closing their places of business to get ready for the anticipated flooding. So this is their town square. This obelisk is designed to ward off the plague. You can see that there's still a lot of people there with their umbrellas and their raincoats, you know, going through these little, you know, pedestrian streets with all kinds of little shops and stuff. And we like 2 or 3 times just like went into a cafe to have coffee, which we really didn't need, just to get out of the weather. So the castle, though, was pretty impressive. And it was very different from the castle in Prague. So this castle has 5 courtyards. So you start in courtyard 1, you go through like an opening like you see here, 2, 3, 4, and then the 5th one. So this is the first courtyard, and this is the castle tower. It's all painted. It's not tiled, it's painted. Whereas the actual castle pieces, these are all tiled. And you can see the cobblestones. Oh my God, were they slippery. It was really scary walking around. The castle had a moat around it, and it actually has bears in it. We were lucky enough, I guess, to see one of the bears. I mean, I felt kind of bad for it. It just wasn't a very inviting location. It didn't seem like a habitat like you see in zoos. These bears are just like at the moat. Now, this little area here is called the Cloak Bridge. And this connects the castle proper to the theater. And it has 4 levels to it. One is open air, and then depending on which level you're in, you can come across that without having to get wet or cold or whatever the case may be. The Baroque theater that is at the Český Krumlov Castle was worth the trip down just to see this theater. So this is the best preserved Baroque theater in Europe. It's in its original building. It has its original orchestra pit, stage, machinery, sets, scripts, props, costumes. All of this has been preserved in pristine condition. It was built in 1680 and it was then renovated in 1765. So in the 1700s, opera was very popular, and places wanted to emulate the imperial court in Vienna, which is where there was like the Baroque theater that everybody wanted to have. And so the prince that was there at that time wanted his court to be able to measure up to that court. And so he built this. There were many of these all over Europe. I mean, at that period of time, this was, it was a nice theater, but there were a lot of them. Unfortunately, most of them burned down because there was no electricity. They were lit with candles. They used fireworks inside during the shows, and most of them burned down. So whenever they had theater productions, the fire brigade would be like waiting outside. So there are now only 5 Baroque theaters left in Europe, and this one is the best preserved, and it has all its original curtains and sets and everything that I said. The reason for that is that after the prince who built it died, the rest of the family was not nearly into theater the way he was. And in fact, they didn't even want to live in this castle. They built another castle and built a much smaller theater there. So this theater was closed for hundreds of years and not used. In the 50s and 60s, the 1950s and 60s, the Soviets opened it up again and used it for festivals, but didn't really take care of it. So after communism left, it was shut down for renovations, and from 1966 till 1997. And currently, they use this theater for performances during summer festivals. There's 3 summer festivals. They do performances using the original costumes and all the original pieces in it. So it was really fascinating. So what you see here is an optical illusion. It is not as deep as it looks. The sets along the side can be moved in and out by a series of ropes and pulleys that are handled by people who are in the basement underneath the stage. On the floor of the stage, there are openings where people can rise up or drop down from. They have various harnesses where somebody can like fly down onto the stage. Excuse me. They have sound effects for thunder, rain, animal sounds, all kinds of things. Anyway, this theater has 13 different sets. They can do a forest, they can do a garden, they can do a Baroque hall, they can do a town square, and these can be changed in like 10 to 15 seconds by this amazing system that they have that's all underneath. So anyway, so this is the stage. This is the actual theater. It's very dim because it's kept in its original form and not, it's lit now by electricity, but then it was lit by candles. This is the royal box, and that bridge that came over from the castle goes right to this box. Their performances would last up to 8 hours. So people were coming and going through the performances all the time. So the royal family would be, and their guests would be in this box. Important people in the town would be up in the balcony. And then these wooden seats below were for the common people. This is what the ceiling looked like. It was just gorgeous. It reminded me of what I think the Sistine Chapel looks like. These are a side view of the sets. So these are the pieces that can move in and out. They can use 3 sets per performance. And this is what it looks like underneath, where they would have a staff of 30 men down below who would change the sets and do the sound effects and, you know, all of these things for the performances. Anyway, it, like so many things, like pictures just don't do it justice. It was just amazing. Okay, then we went back to Prague on the bus. The day after we left, Český Krumlov flooded. So that you couldn't even be in the town. If we had gone a day later, we wouldn't have been able to do anything that we did. So at least, you know, we got to see the theater, the castle, you know, the streets of the town, even though we were soaked while we were doing it. So the day after we got back, we went to Terezin, also called the Theresienstadt, which was a concentration camp that was an hour north of Prague. So when we were there, it was raining in Prague. It was not raining in Terezin. Not raining all the time anyway, but the weather was just crappy. So Terezin was originally built as a holiday resort for Czech nobility. So this was just a regular town with, you know, people and shops and businesses and schools and libraries and everything. And in 1940, the Nazis evicted all of the town residents, and the Gestapo turned this in to a Jewish ghetto and a concentration camp. So it held primarily Jews from Czechoslovakia. Literally all of the Jews from Prague went through here. So it was more of a transit camp than a long-term camp. So the places that had crematoriums were called extermination camps. So that's like Auschwitz. But this was a transit camp. So people didn't live here typically much more than 3 to 6 months. So more than 150,000 Jews were sent there, which included 15,000 children. And so they would come here, they would live here for a while, and then they would get deported to an extermination camp like Treblinka or Auschwitz. Those were the 2 closest ones, and that's where most of them went. Although it wasn't an extermination camp, about 33,000 people died in the ghetto because of poor sanitation, overcrowding, diseases, and poor nutrition. About 88,000 people were deported, 33,000 people died there. And of the 15,000 children, only 150 of them survived. So in this ghetto, the men, women, and children were all separated. There were all kinds of rules and regulations that didn't necessarily make any sense, but were designed to instill fear and a sense of not being important to the Jews who lived there. There was a man named Freddie Hirsch, who was an athlete and a very charismatic person. He was Jewish, he was sent there, and he somehow got on the good side of some of the Gestapo and convinced them that they should allow him to have programs for the children, to keep the children healthier so that they could be sent off to other camps and be healthy enough to work, and to maintain order. So the children in Terezin actually had school, and they had gym classes, and they had art classes that were part of their daily life. So the adults in Terezin, however, Terezin was used as a showpiece of how well the Nazi Germany was treating the Jews there. So when there were going to be visitors, they would hold concerts, lectures, performances. And so some of the adults that had those skills, artists, musicians, they were practicing on a regular basis, and they were sort of elite prisoners, so to speak. They were fed better, they were housed better. But the vast majority of them were overcrowded, poorly fed, and it was just a terrible place. I read a book called Helga's Diary after I was there and heard about this child, Helga, who survived and went on to write this memoir. Just the descriptions are just absolutely horrifying. I didn't take a lot of pictures there because I was so upset most of the time I was there. So this is an underground hidden synagogue on the left. On the right are some bunks in some of the, they call them dormitories. Now, this looks like it might not be too bad, except that there were 30 people in this room, and this was the sleeping arrangements. There was no running water. There was no heat. And it was just terrible. So these are some of the pictures that the children drew. And this one up here on the top is by Helga Weiss, which is the one that I read her memoir. But the children would draw the things that they remembered or the things that they saw. The train tracks coming in and out. And on the right-hand side was like a sculpture using real suitcases of the people who came. Boy, I've really gone over, haven't I? Is everybody still here?
Most of us.
Okay,
Still here.
should I keep going or should I stop? I'm
I'm
almost
getting a
done.
little tired.
I'm almost done.
Keep going.
But if you want to go, please feel free. I understand. No problem. Let's see. Where's my screen? Hold on. Share. Okay. So, oops, the day after we got back, we went to Terrazin. And then we had 2 days on the castle side of the river, which is the hilly side of the river. Oh, shoot. Can you guys still see that?
Yes.
Yes.
How did I lose it? Oh, there it is. Anyway, so this was the hotel we stayed at. It was up the top of a hill near the castle. And this was the view from our hotel room going down the street, and the buildings that you see there are on the other side of the river, the spires that you see. This is something that I thought was really cool. And it was probably on the Old Town, but I didn't notice it there. Above a lot of doorways would be these pictures or these symbols or these paintings or sculptures or whatever. And what I was told was before there was widespread literacy, this is how people described where they lived. I live at the house of 3 violins. I live at the house of the Swan. You know, go up past the house of the Lamb. Anyway, I just thought it was so cool. I probably found 24 of these things. And in fact, where we were staying, the Hotel Golden Star was a golden star, and that's how it got its name. So here's the castle. It was pouring buckets the day we went to the castle. So the castle entrance is guarded by 2 soldiers, and they have a changing of the guard the same way they do in London, full of pomp and circumstance. It's once a day, like at noon, but I wasn't going to hang around in the rain and wait for that. Inside the castle, this is the castle itself. This is the cathedral that's inside the castle. The cathedral took like 600 years to build it to what it looks like in its current state. And it is a functioning cathedral. We couldn't go in that day because it was a Sunday. And this is the side of the cathedral. And you can walk up 300 steps to the top of this. It's the tallest point in Prague and supposedly has a great view. But my cane and I were not going up 300 steps. This is a gorgeous mosaic that's right here on that building. This is just to show you the river and how high it got. These steps right here lead down to a walkway by the river that is basically gone. And then the river is just roiling. No boats were running. No cruises were happening. That's the Charles Bridge that you see there. That's it. I'm so sorry. I took so long. Get overly enthusiastic.
Great.
So anyway,
That's great.
like I
presentation.
said, the fact
Yeah.
that I would love to go back there, even even though it was raining and it was gross and I was hobbling around, there was so much that I didn't get to do. Supposedly the gardens around the castle, there are 3 different garden areas that are supposed to be beautiful. We didn't get to go on the river. There's a whole neighborhood that we never got to. There's a monastery that brews beer. This very famous Strahov monastery. We couldn't get there. We
Oh.
kept having to go in and dry out.
It was
But
fast,
anyway,
absolutely fascinating, I thought.
beautiful, 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 beautiful city. So,
It was. And I have to say, I went to Chesapeake Crumlove and I did not see that theater. I don't know what
Oh,
I
really?
remember walking on that bridge and maybe it was closed. I didn't know.
well, you have to buy tickets in advance.
Okay.
There's only one English tour a day,
All
and it
right.
has a maximum of 30 people.
Okay.
So
More
I
research
bought my
than I did.
tickets like a month in advance
Okay.
because I really wanted to go to it.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah.
That was great.
But yeah, Prague is known for classical music, the theater. It's a very cultural place. The food is really like heavy, meat and potatoes kind of food. I got sick of it pretty quickly, but the beer was great. Okay.
Thank
So is
you.
anybody doing any traveling anytime soon?
Hopefully, we're trying to make plans.
Anybody else? When do you